Welcome to the Irish Occupational Therapy Podcast, hosted by me, Jen Trechek.
And me, Aideen Rutledge.
This podcast is dedicated to exploring the world of occupational therapy, sharing the latest research and techniques, and providing insights into the many ways that occupational therapy can help people of all ages live more fulfilling and meaningful lives.
Whether you are a practicing occupational therapist, a student of occupational therapy, or simply curious about this fascinating field, this podcast is for you. We'll be interviewing experts in the field, sharing stories from the front lines of occupational therapy practice, and providing tips and advice for anyone looking to get the most out of their therapy.
So sit back, relax, and join us on this exciting journey into the world of occupational therapy in Ireland. So really welcome back to the Irish Occupational Therapy Podcast. We're delighted to welcome Bridget Harney. Bridget is an occupational therapist in First Episode Psychosis Services. And if Bridget and Psychosis kind of links and rings bells, that is because we had John O'Brien on last season who spoke absolutely effusively about his brilliant OT. And that is Bridget Harney, who we have with us today. You're very welcome, Bridget.
Thank you very much.
So you work in First Episode Psychosis. It's an area that maybe is not familiar to everybody. Tell us a little bit about what First Episode Psychosis Service is, does, who do you serve?
So I work in the Ballyfermot Community Mental Health Team and serve a really wonderful set of communities in Lucan, Adamstown, Ballyfermot, Chapel Lizard, Palmerstown. And we provide service to people between the ages of 18 and 35 who have their first episode of psychosis, or in some instances, maybe they've had psychosis some time, but this is the first time that they are receiving treatment for those experiences. And I work as part of a multidisciplinary team, specifically myself and two nurses, John and Laura, work in the provision of family-based interventions, kind of occupational therapy, CBT, and physical health monitoring as well. But in the wider team of Ballyfermot, there's psychology, social work, lots of nursing teams, speech and language therapy, dietetics. We have a really rich team there. So I'm very fortunate to work as part of that.
The whole shebang. You've got one of everyone.
Yeah. No, I'm incredibly lucky. Yeah, it's a really contemporary and developmental health service, thankfully.
Bridget, just about the word psychosis, it sounds like a scary word. Can we talk a little bit about that? How do you and your team help people to understand their psychosis and their diagnosis?
So psychosis is a scary word, unfortunately, for lots of people. The first thing to say, psychosis isn't actually a diagnosis. It is just a human experience. And in the case of the work that I do, it is that people have had psychotic experiences that are frightening or disruptive to their lives. So essentially all of us might experience psychosis at some point. It's a very normal human experience, but not to the point where it maybe is disruptive. So I might just say what psychosis is, just because I think people don't even understand the word. It broadly falls into two categories of experiences. One is hallucinations, which is where you might hear something, sounds or voices, see something, smell, taste or feel something on your body, that there isn't actually the external stimulus to make that happen, or that other people would share with you. So you might hear a voice, but I can't hear that voice. And the other category is delusions, which is where you have strongly held beliefs about something, despite the fact that there's strong evidence to the contrary, or where it's not shared by other people around you. It's kind of an unusual belief within the context of your cultural and social world. So they're the two broad-based pieces. But like I say, often people might hear a voice of a loved one after they've died, but we don't need to treat that or do anything about that. But psychosis can occur as part of mental health issues as well. And one of the roles of First Episode team is to support people in a way that means that they won't go on to develop a kind of a mental health issue or be diagnosed with a mental illness. Or it can be that even though that might be the case for that person, that they can still live a very meaningful and fulfilling life despite those experiences. I think people confuse the word psychosis. Like in the media, you see words like psycho and things like that written there that make people feel that psychosis means that you're dangerous or somehow a threat to other people. And that just isn't the case for the vast majority of people. And actually, when people use the word psycho in the media, which I don't agree with that being used at all, but it generally actually refers to psychopaths, not psychotic. And that's where the word derives from, but it is confused a lot of the time. And that unfortunately means people often have a very negative perception of themselves when they hear that they are experiencing psychosis. But we see it as a human experience. We don't see it as something that people need to really be afraid of. And obviously I understand it's very normal for me because I spent over 10 years working with people with that. But in general, people who experience psychosis are less likely to be violent towards other people than people who don't, actually, statistically. So that's important for you to remember as well.
I think it really makes sense that it is part of the human experience, because when we talk about depression or anxiety, we can often feel, oh, I can get that because I've felt low before, or I felt a little bit anxious, and then it's kind of those illnesses are maybe more to the extreme. And I guess with psychosis, we might think that we can't relate, but actually, like if you've ever been on morphine after an operation, or sometimes even walking home late at night and you're kind of feeling, oh, is there somebody following me, and you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable and uneasy, that's kind of on the spectrum of it. And then when it becomes a significant issue, that's where you guys step in.
Absolutely. And so it's not that we're seeking that anyone has an unusual experience and belief needs to come and have that eradicated. It's more integrating those experiences with how we see ourselves, our identity in the world around us, really. But certainly I've had experience. I remember when I was doing my final exams, I was in an attic room and I kept thinking I heard the doorbell and coming down to open it. I just hadn't had enough sleep. I was stressed. I walked up and down the stairs quite a number of times for a week or two during that time. I don't need any particular help around that, but it is exactly that, that spectrum of experience, and being able to place ourselves on that to better relate to other people who have more profound or difficult experiences with psychosis.
And Bridget, what about your role for those people? What does the role of the OT look day to day in that area?
So in lots of ways, occupational therapy, isn't it? I mean, it's really focused on people having meaningful, balanced occupational lives. My experience is, because I'm working with a lot of younger people, often those transitions into adulthood have been very difficult, and they may have fallen behind their peer group in terms of education or work, depending on the level of disruption. So a lot of the time my work is in supporting people to kind of regain those social connections, either return to work or work for the first time, return to education, or even make a plan around what it is that they would like to do in their future. So really trying to just maintain those normal milestone developmental stages as they move into adulthood. I think what maybe is a little bit different is oftentimes there's a greater need to spend more time in the engagement phase. People, unfortunately, when they come to see me, they're at a really difficult time in their lives. Like, no one's coming to see me because things are as they want them to be. So people are often quite distressed and quite frightened. And it's interesting, because I work as part of a team, often it is occupational therapy that is the first thing people are willing to engage with, because it just makes sense to people. They've had this really disruptive experience, but they want to get back to work or college or whatever. So I find, in a way, my work can be part of that engagement process, that someone accesses not just OT, but then the other treatments that we know are really helpful to people. And I think it's about being age appropriate. That's a big part of the way I work as well. And one of the beauties, I guess, in mental health, typically people work across the whole of the adult lifespan. So I feel very fortunate that I get to have that more youth-orientated piece of work. Men typically present with psychosis between the ages of 15 and 25 for the first time, and for women it's 25 to 35. So that's why we have those age and those kind of age limits. But just being able to kind of base my work around those appropriate lifestyle pieces for people of that age is really nice.
So a lot of work around the community access, facilities, depending on people's interests and.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's definitely about profiling, what people's occupational identity is, their values, their interests, and is their current use of time actually matching to that? Where I work, there's a really rich set of, resources about what you're interested in. We'll be able to find a good match for that, which is one of the wonderful things about working in a more urban environment, that you do have those options. But oftentimes as well, people's sense of wanting to connect with nature, those kind of things, actually being in an urban environment can make that more challenging. So being able to work with people around resource available in that way is really helpful and useful for people as well.
Is engaging in those occupations that are important to somebody, is that a protective factor in relation to psychosis or psychotic experiences?
So we know that people often in the period of time before they become kind of what we call frankly or kind of fully psychotic, those symptoms emerge, can often fall away from their kind of occupational roles. And absolutely having something meaningful to do, having a life worth living, having all that structure, the routine, all things that go along with these valued occupational roles is definitely a protective factor, but also it helps reduce the impact of the symptoms. So it is a treatment as well as a preventative piece as well. But I guess oftentimes when I meet people, the functional difficulties they're experiencing or the loss of occupational roles can be directly to do with the psychosis, or it could actually be that the loss of those roles is actually what's led to the psychosis. So you're kind of constantly on this line of what's preventative and what's kind of causing in terms of people's difficulties. And certainly I would often meet people who've had functional occupation difficulties throughout their lifetime, and that might well have been what contributed them to experiencing psychosis at this point in their life as well. But luckily I'm not limited to just maybe working with what has arisen because of the psychosis. We're not looking for people to get back to how they were. We're looking for them to have the best life possible. So even though someone may not have had the opportunity to get the occupational supports they needed when they were a child or a teenager, I can do that now to the best of my ability. That's something I really appreciate about my work as well, because it's a 3-year program. So I get to really work with people over a protracted period of time. So we can bit by bit kind of work through the different difficulties that people might have been experiencing.
It's opportunities for new beginnings, really, then, isn't it, Bridget? And that kind of rings back to John's episode when he spoke about his journey with photography. How did you feel when you heard John speak on that episode?
I feel very grateful to John and to you guys for creating the opportunity. I think it's very unique that the therapist, you get to hear someone's reflections on their work with you years on, and also with you having no involvement. It's very different, someone kind of giving you feedback. John is so generous, and he went through so much, and he has persevered over so much, and he still has such huge concern for other people with similar experiences, again, to help their need, and also amplifying other people. I mean, he came on this purely just to amplify OT and to talk about how great it is, which just speaks to the person that he is. So it's lovely to hear, and it was actually really interesting as well for me to hear what was most important to him in the work. And one of the things I reflected on is we definitely talked a lot about the budgeting and financial piece, which obviously we did work on. But in a way that wasn't the first thing that would have come to my mind. But obviously at the life stage he's at now, buying a house, he's more focused on finances, and we can all get that. And it made me think about, as OTs, the work we do with people, we don't know at what point in their life that work will kind of reemerge as being really, really important to them. And that's why that skill building aspect of what we do is so important, because we need different skills more so or less so at different times in our lives. So I'm alongside John at the moment in terms of housing stuff, so I totally get why that feels more important. But yeah, it was really lovely, and it's so nice to hear how someone's getting on many years after you had the opportunity to work with them. The only thing I'd say though is he said I had to be patient. I never felt I had to be patient at all. That's just something I didn't share that experience. I just found him so engaged and resilient and motivated and determined. So patience isn't something that I felt I had to draw on at all. That's my only point of contradiction with John, is that I needed to be.
That's so interesting, the different perspectives. And I think service users or clients can often, they focus on that internal process, and that can be so different. It's really helpful to hear the different perspectives.
Yeah, but it certainly, I know, it's a huge joy to see John's progress, but anyone's progress in the work that we do. And I think oftentimes when I meet someone and they've just started on their journey, they can't believe, it's very hard for them to imagine what their life's going to be like in 3 years. So people like John sharing that, because I know John was very clear that he couldn't imagine that his life could be where it's at. But I have this huge privilege in getting to witness that all the time. So follow through, and that's why the long-term work piece feels like such a privilege to me, to be able to work with people for 3 years.
The budgeting and the money management bit, that was my favorite part of that episode, actually. It was so practical, and it really spoke to our skills as occupational therapists. What other really practical life skills do you focus on with some of your clients, Bridget?
So I see it as a really big part, of my job. So like, for example, I'm just thinking something recently is actually people being able to make phone calls. I think that's particularly true of younger people, where, God be with the old days of the landlines, but people, don't use their phones in the same way they did. So being able to, make a phone call is something I'd work with people on, or even leave a voice message is something that people practice, ringing me and leaving me voice messages and those kind of things. That'd be one practical thing. Something else might be in terms of, say, technology, but using your phone or whatever to support your routine or your structure. So being able to kind of, set up reminders, use a diary. I find more and more that people don't kind of use diary type systems anymore because we have text prompts for everything we need to do. And so people struggle much more to organize themselves in that way, using an ATM card. Driving, I spend a lot of my time in terms of driver theory tests and practicing those things and getting people to that point. And then there's a lot of practical work in relation to study related skills and people being able to manage their time and understand assignments and lay out their study schedules and work as well. So they'd probably be the most common. Work-related skills like using transport as well would be a big one. Yeah, I could probably keep talking for 25 minutes. Cooking is another thing that I would do with people as well. Yeah, like there's just a huge amount of that. Shopping. Yeah, all those kinds of things. Yeah. Now I have to say at the moment that's less so because of course for young people moving out of home isn't as viable an option in the current market. But yeah, that ebbs and flows of course over the years. But yeah, I probably did more cooking 10 years ago than I do now because it isn't as relevant to people right now. Using the washing machine, ironing shirts, yeah. All of that stuff.
All the useful things, Bridget.
And I guess it sounds like, a lot of young people are living with family rather than independently now, which does change what we do. But I'm thinking for a family member, kind of seeing their young person becoming unwell or struggling with things that they might not fully understand, that must be really difficult. How do you advise kind of family and friends, if they have concerns about a loved one, but what kind of things should they be looking for? And then what kind of things can they do?
So family and friends are obviously such a huge, important factor in someone's recovery. So I think the first thing is that the earlier someone can get help, the better. So that's probably true of everything, but it's particularly true in the evidence base around people with psychosis. So I think a lot of the time it's about family members trusting their instinct. I think oftentimes they know something's not right, but they think, oh, maybe it's just they're moody or maybe it's just this or that because it's frightening. And it's also hard to know sometimes where to get help, or people sometimes may seek help and kind of get knocked back or not actually get the help that they need or expect. So the first thing is to, if possible, get the young person to reach out for help. GP is a good point to call in terms of assessing what the needs are. And then the other part, I think, is really around the family members supporting their own well-being. You can't pour from an empty cup and all that people need to be able to recognize that while they're putting all this energy into a loved one, particularly if they're in that push to get them help, that supporting themselves and their own well-being is really integral. And if they can get opportunities for education on what psychosis is, or family therapy, which is something that we do offer, to take that step, because it's very frightening. I think unfortunately our parents sometimes think they've done something wrong and they haven't. But then the idea of engaging in therapy where they feel in some way that they're going to be, their failings are going to be highlighted, or that there's going to be something of that nature, but just asking people to trust that we understand psychosis is complex and there's lots of factors. But in terms of the indications that someone might have psychosis, sometimes the person is expressing very unusual ideas. That's a very overt indication of psychosis, but oftentimes it is unfortunately more subtle things. It could be the person is more socially withdrawn, falling out of normal routines, maybe they've dropped out of college. But the difficulty, of course, is those things can happen without psychosis. So I definitely recognize it's a really challenging thing. And that's why getting the person support, even if they have just dropped out of college and there's no particular, it's not psychosis, it's still helpful to get that person connected with support in that instance. And then if that psychosis is there, it can be identified. But generally things like, sleep routines changing, and even that sense of person's personality might seem to be different. It isn't, of course. Once the person is well, the personality is as it always is. But when someone's very distressed or preoccupied or worrying ideas or thoughts, they can become much more kind of irritable or argumentative than they might normally be. So that's one of the things I really notice. I meet people when obviously things are difficult for them, and it's really nice to actually get to really meet their real personality as things improve. And really important for us to remember that as service providers, that how we meet people at the worst times in their life is an indication of of who they are. I mean, people meet me in a bad day, I wouldn't like them to to globalize that.
To hold that,
yeah.
Bridget, what about you're in an area of expertise now, you've developed your skills over the years. Can you share with us what approaches and frameworks you use, or what CPD have you invested in as a mental health OT that has influenced your practice?
So I think in terms of kind of, occupational type models, it's probably the model of human occupation is the model that I would lean into most often. And I suppose part in the development of that is AMPS, assessment motion process skills, I think was a huge huge area developed for me when I did that training, which is a long time ago now. And since then I've done kind of the advanced AMPS and the other AMPS training. Obviously, as you probably aware, AMPS is maybe in a time of flux at the moment, unfortunately. But I suppose in terms of that training, in terms of honing my observation skills, but more than that, that really clear piece around figuring out where it is that the person needs support to kind of acquire skills, or where it is that you want to try and compensate through environmental or social strategies. And to me, that was probably the most important CPD from an OT point of view. In terms of the first episode practice, cognitive behavioral therapy for psychosis, is a really helpful way of being able to approach conversations. And from my point of view, I don't provide CBT therapy, but I do support people in kind of getting familiar with maybe some of it, in order that if they are maybe only engaging with me initially, that they might become familiar with that model and then might engage with formalized CBT at a later point with one of my colleagues who's trained and experienced in that. But also it's just helpful that we all have a kind of unified approach in terms of seeing ourselves not as knowing everything, but rather in kind of discovering this together with the client in terms of these experiences of beliefs that they're having. But what I would say as well is CPD is really important, but for me it's actually probably supervision and mentorship that has made the biggest difference over my career, and getting to learn from OT colleagues and non-OT colleagues, I think has been hugely developmental for me. There's an OT, Susan Kyo, who's specialised in rehabilitation in my service, and she was one of my first supervisors, and still somewhat against her will, she's still kind of my still is a mentor for me. I know something is against her will, but having that kind of peer support and having those opportunities to bounce these kind of really technical occupational things off someone else, because even though I have all the support and learning from my nursing colleagues in first episode, and I learned so much from them in terms of CPD approaches and managing risk and lots of other really important skill sets, it's also important that I have OT colleagues where I can really kind of get into the technical aspects of people's functional difficulties and what the best approach is, and when something's failed, what I can do next. And that for me is the opportunity with the 3-year program. It's given me a lot of feedback on what I do that works and what I do that doesn't work, because I get to see through to the end. Because sometimes I felt in short piece of intervention, I'm not quite clear which of those things would have had the most long-standing impact. So it has really helped me hone and be much clearer on what approaches are better for what people. The recovery approach is a really important approach within mental health broadly, which is the understanding that everyone's experience is unique, and that we're not necessarily trying to eliminate symptoms, or allowing people to live a meaningful life with or without the elimination of those experiences. So notwithstanding, if you don't have symptoms, life is a bit easier. So I mean, but of course, some people have pleasant psychotic experiences as well, where they have voices that keep them company. They have things in that experience that they do want to maintain. So we're not there to eliminate anything that someone kind of wants to keep, but also weighing up whether even those positive experiences could actually isolate you from your social group, or could actually still disrupt your function. But it's about figuring out what's important to that person, what their goals are. But yeah, definitely a model human occupation.
You're a moho girl.
We need to end. I'm a moho girl. That's that's how I've always been. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier about the importance of family members looking after their own mental health and well-being and not pouring from an empty cup. And as an OT working in the area, I'd imagine you face lots of challenges and the potential for burnout in relation to that, or compassion fatigue. What are the things that you need to do to mind yourself, or how do you practice what you preach?
I think one thing I would just mention is that support from colleagues. I think working as part of a team is hugely important to me in terms of supporting my well-being in this work. And then, of course, it's about trying to have a balanced occupational life myself. And I have For me, in thinking about this, there's the pieces I do day to day, but in lots of ways for me, what's really important is I do things that are entirely different to my work life outside of work. So, for example, at the moment, I'm doing a higher diploma in apiculture in Galway, which is the study of bees and beekeeping. So I'm a beekeeper.
Wow.
And I started oil painting a year ago. I have a long-standing passion with baking that I continue to do. So it's these types of kind of doing experiences that are really important to me. That allows me to continue to develop my identity, my interests outside of my passion for my work and my desire to do the best I can as an occupational therapist. But I also find it interesting that in being really connected with myself as an occupational being, that's a really helpful process with my clients in terms of even being able to kind of give examples of myself as an occupational being. Because occupational therapy, isn't just relevant to people who obviously have health issues, it's relevant to all of us. And so that can be really helpful for people who feel like that work we're doing is because there's something wrong or something at odds with them, when in fact it's just something that we all need. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes people will tell us at the end of the 3 years that their life is better than it was before they became unwell, but equally it's better than they imagine it could have been had they not become unwell. And that's because most of us don't get these opportunities to reflect on ourselves and our lives and ourselves as occupational beings. So certainly beekeeping comes up sometimes in my work as an example of freeing ourselves to do something we're interested in. I mean, I'm from West Wicklow, but I live in Dublin. Beekeeping doesn't make a lot of sense in lots of ways. I mean, I don't think people in my apartment block would be happy if I set them up on the balcony. Also, probably personality-wise, most beekeepers are very maybe more introverted, quieter people, very slow and steady, very meticulous. I'm none of those things. And yet it's just something that I'm really, interested in. And so I've pursued it because I don't only have to do things I'm good at. Certainly oil painting is not something that I'm good at, but I do it for other reasons, because we do live in a society or culture maybe that impress upon us doing things we're good at, or confusing something being hard with something being bad. And so, for me, engaging in all these different things that I mean, I am recognizing themes. I do a lot of things I'm not good at, but anyway.
But it's also getting away. It's getting away as well from the product or the outcome, and just enjoying the process. Like the fact that you will maybe never have a beehive in Dublin.
Oh, no, I do have beehives in Wicklow. So okay. I do. No, I am actively beekeeping, but I mean, it's not very convenient. But I found a way to make it happen. Yeah.
Wow.
Bridget, that's so interesting. It's made me question all of my occupations. They're very boring in comparison.
Well, I think as well, it's, when I think about over the course of my work, like, I've had clients who wanted to do sean-nós singing. And when you start looking into this, I found this whole community of sean-nós singing things you can get involved in. And I had someone who wanted to do bell ringing, church bell ringing.
Yeah.
The whole community around that, so these things that might seem seemingly obscure. I mean, beekeeping might sound like an obscure hobby. It's not at all. Like, I go to huge conferences full of beekeepers, but sometimes in the world we're in, we can become a little bit limited in what we think our options are for hobbies or for the things. As long as you enjoy them, it doesn't matter. I don't think you need an obscure hobby, but I suppose it's sometimes helpful for people to really reconnect with what it is they're actually interested in before, I suppose, society or culture. Yeah, kind of limited. I always think of, in college, we watched Billy Elliot as part of my training. I don't know if you're familiar. It's based about a young
ballet dancer.
In Yorkshire, who's from a mining family who became a ballet dancer, essentially. Spoiler alert, if you haven't watched it. But it's the idea that he transcends gender and cultural norms and even economic and demographic norms to do something that he wanted to do. And he was transformed by that. So I think there's something about the occupational transformation that I think is really important. And in my role in the team, sometimes, when I get to work with someone and see how they are when they're doing something, and being able to, share that with the team in terms of how transformed someone is, it can help the whole team have a different perspective on someone, because often we are only meeting the difficulty and we don't get to meet the kind of very healthy, rich, functional parts of people. Which I feel really privileged that I get to kind of see that and get to explore those really positive and able parts of people, albeit that they're sitting alongside maybe areas of difficulty or areas of challenge for that person. So that I think for me, focusing on occupational transformation for myself actually, but for my clients is really significant.
Amazing. One of the roles that you took on, Bridget, is a service improvement lead in the HSE. That sounds interesting and challenging. Tell us about that role.
So CHO7 in 2017, I think they were fairly courageous innovation in allowing 3 clinicians, so actually 2 OTs and 1 speech and language therapist. So that's Susan Keogh, who I actually mentioned already, and Jennifer Beaufrey, that we all moved to a kind of half-time clinical roles and took on some service improvement initiatives, which were designed through consultation with staff, service users, other community agencies. So it's been a bit of a long road, COVID in the middle of all that as well. But I think we've achieved some really exciting piece of work. So individual placement support, which is employment-based supports, people with mental health difficulties, various different types of housing supports and housing models. We've worked on staff engagement and support. So speaking to that need to support ourselves, we run Schwartz rounds, which are space for staff to reflect on the emotional and personal impact of their work. We do, and lots of kind of peer-based pieces as well. So peer support workers and recovery education pieces. So we're really fortunate to get to work with people with lived experience and their families, staff and community agencies to develop these bodies of work. And for me, I mean, some of the work relates more directly to my work as an occupational therapist and some not so much, but Patricia Deegan, who's an amazing kind of advocate for mental health pieces in America, she talks about not wanting to mainstream people, that we need to widen the stream, so that we don't need people to change. We need to kind of broaden the stream that they're entering into. So my sense is by collaboration with all these community agencies, by building awareness, by building inclusivity and opportunity in a really real way, we're allowing people without having to, necessarily have got rid of all their symptoms or to, not have any difficulties, that they can still become very active members of their community and their society. And we're really fortunate in the area we work in, that there's so much vibrant opportunity, and the community agencies we work with are just terrific, and they're just they so want to include everyone, and in a way us sharing more information on mental health and the people that we work with allows them to do that. So that's another thing to do.
There's an opportunity around acceptance, isn't it, Bridget, to be part of and to lead?
It's about belonging as opposed to fitting in, because I think oftentimes, even I think about some of the maybe older types of interventions OTs did provide, it feels like some of that was trying to get people to fit in as opposed to belong. And I think we see that in kind of the different areas of health or disability practice, in terms of supporting people to be in a more inclusive space, as opposed to them trying to conform or not show themselves and who they really are. So it's really nice to be at this point of time in society, I guess, where we're looking to develop that more broadly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bridget. It's been really interesting and helpful to get your perspective and to understand a little bit more about the work that you do. I really appreciate all of your insights.
And I feel like there's one thing I should have said about psychosis, which is just such an important message. But psychosis is really common and it's really treatable. Just to say that we have all the evidence now for what really helps people. So just if that was, because different people might listen to this podcast, but just to hear that message really clearly, that about 1 in every 100 people in Ireland will experience psychosis at some point in a way that requires treatment, and that thankfully we know a lot more about what treatments help now, so that it's a really positive message, hopefully, for people who might be going through that, or for their family members who are in the middle of it right now.
That's all for today's episode on the Irish Occupational Therapy podcast. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and found it informative and engaging. If you've any questions or comments, we would love to hear from you. You can email us at irishotpodcast@gmail.com or connect on Instagram or Facebook.
And remember to subscribe to our podcast so that you never miss an episode. If you found this episode helpful, please leave us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback is important and helps us to improve the show, so please do leave it. Thank you for listening to the Irish Occupational Therapy podcast, hosted by myself, Jen Trechak.
and myself, Aideen Rutledge.
We look forward to sharing more insights and knowledge with you in future episodes. Until then, take care.